My world fell apart in the most unimaginable way. My girlfriend of 10 years, my high school sweetheart, became pregnant by my younger brother just weeks before our wedding. And if that wasn't enough, she left me to marry him. Now, 6 years later, fate has dealt a tragic blow, and my estranged family is asking me for a favor. Where do I even begin? I'm 32 now, and for the past 6 years, I've lived estranged from the people I once called family. The events that tore us apart were so profound, so catastrophic, that even now, the memories still sting. But I'll try to explain, piece by piece, memory by memory, how my life turned upside down. 6 years ago, I was engaged to Rebecca, also 32. She wasn't just my fiancée, she was my everything. We'd been together since we were 16, high school lab partners who stumbled into love over shared laughter and awkward moments. I'll never forget our first date. I saved up for weeks just to take her to a nice restaurant in town, my palms sweaty, my heart pounding. Of course, I knocked over my water glass in nervousness. But Rebecca? She just laughed, her warmth melting away my embarrassment. That's when I knew she was special. From then on, I poured everything into making her happy. For her 17th birthday, I orchestrated a scavenger hunt, leaving clues at all our favorite spots. The final clue led her to a picnic I'd set up in the park, her favorite foods laid out like a love letter in edible form. The way her eyes sparkled when she saw it, that image is seared into my heart. Even when life pulled us to separate colleges, I refused to let distance define us. Every weekend, I'd drive 3 hours to see her, no matter how heavy my workload was. During exam weeks, I'd send care packages stuffed with her favorite snacks and handwritten notes, hoping they'd give her strength. And when we finally returned to our hometown after college, I worked extra shifts to save up for her dream vacation, a whirlwind tour of Europe. I still remember how breathtaking she looked on that private boat ride in Paris, the Eiffel Tower glittering behind her as if it, too, admired her beauty. When she decided to pursue her master's degree, I was her biggest cheerleader. I took on a second job to help with tuition, staying up late to quiz her for exams or proofread papers, even if it meant going to work exhausted the next day. Everything I did for us, for the future I believed we were building together. On our 10th anniversary, I pulled out all the stops. I recreated our first date down to the smallest detail, even spilling my water accidentally to make her laugh. After dinner, I proposed to her under the stars on the same beach where we shared our first kiss. She said yes, and I thought I was the luckiest man alive. But just weeks before our wedding, everything shattered. Rebecca sat me down, her face pale, her voice trembling, and confessed she was pregnant. But the child wasn't mine. She'd been having an affair with my younger brother, William. My own brother. The betrayal hit like a thunderclap, deafening and all-consuming. She went on to say that she'd fallen in love with him and wanted to marry him instead. I was furious, heartbroken, and utterly lost. I turned to my parents, expecting outrage, support, anything to validate my pain. Instead, I was met with calm indifference. My mother, always doting on William, the golden child, was thrilled about becoming a grandmother. My father brushed off my heartbreak as if it were a minor inconvenience. They told me I should be happy for them. Happy? For the people who tore my life apart? That was the moment I realized I didn't just lose Rebecca, I lost my family, too. I packed my bags, moved to a new city, and cut off all contact. For 6 years, I lived in the shadow of that betrayal, trying to rebuild. My father called occasionally, but the conversations were stilted and hollow. My mother, Rebecca, and William? Not a word. I didn't even know my nephew's name. Then, a few days ago, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with my mother's name, a name I hadn't seen in years. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice, strained and trembling, delivered news that stopped me in my tracks. William had been in a terrible accident. He was now paralyzed, unable to work or care for his family. A storm of emotions swirled within me, shock, sadness, anger. Was this karma? Was it tragedy? Or both? Despite everything they'd done to me, I couldn't ignore the weight of her words. And now, they were reaching out to me, the black sheep they cast aside, asking for my help. What do I do? Can you imagine the whirlwind of emotions that hit me? A storm of anger, betrayal, and a glimmer of curiosity I couldn't shake. Despite everything, despite 6 long years of silence, here I was, on the verge of stepping back into the chaos I'd fought so hard to escape. And why? Because my mother, the very woman who stood by and let my life shatter all those years ago, had called. Again. And again. Each call chipped away at the walls I had built until I couldn't ignore her anymore. At first, I had flat out refused to listen. How could she expect me to step in now? To play hero to the very people who ripped my world apart? But as the days stretched into weeks, the relentless guilt she wielded started to weigh on me. Family comes first, she had said, over and over, like it was some magic spell meant to erase the past. And maybe it was her persistence, or my own simmering curiosity, but eventually, I cracked. I agreed to visit the hospital, if only to confirm just how dire the situation really was. The drive there was nerve-wracking. My thoughts raced, bouncing between memories of betrayal and the faint hope that time might have dulled the pain. But as I stepped into that stark, sterile hospital room, reality hit me like a freight train. There he was, William, my younger brother, the golden child. He looked so small, so fragile, hooked up to machines that beat steadily, a grim reminder of how far he had fallen. And then I saw them. My parents. They looked older, worn down by life or maybe guilt, who knows? My mother's eyes lit up as she saw me, and she rushed forward like nothing had ever happened. "You're here," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. But I couldn't. I couldn't let her hug me, not yet. I stepped back, my arms folded like a shield. And then, my eyes locked on her. Rebecca. She stood by William's bedside, her face pale and lined with worry. The woman I had once imagined spending forever with now stood by my brother, the man who had stolen everything from me. Seeing her was like ripping open an old wound. Memories surged forward, the first date where I had spilled water out of sheer nervousness, the scavenger hunt I'd planned for her birthday, the sunset boat ride in Paris where I thought we had sealed our future. All of it, every moment of love and care I'd poured into our relationship, came flooding back like a tidal wave. She noticed me, her eyes widening with a flicker of emotions I couldn't quite read, regret, guilt, relief. Whatever it wasn't enough to erase the betrayal. I felt the air thicken as the room grew unbearably tense. My parents tried to bridge the silence with pleasantries, but I couldn't focus. I couldn't stop replaying the moment she told me she was leaving, pregnant with my brother's child, and how my family had turned their backs on me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the future they were asking me to shape. They wanted me to play father to the child, a child who might not even understand the tangled web of lies and betrayal that brought them into the world. Could I really do that? Could I really ignore the scars they left me with to help the people who had crushed me without hesitation? As I stood there, caught between the ghosts of what was and the fragile reality of what is, I realized one thing: this decision would define not just my future, but who I wanted to be. Could I find forgiveness in my heart, not for them, but for myself? Or would this moment cement my resolve to leave the past exactly where it belonged, behind me? The answer wasn't clear, not yet. But one thing was certain: this wasn't just about them. It was about reclaiming my own story. The moment I saw Rebecca again, all the plans we had made for the future came rushing back. I couldn't stop thinking about how she was once my best friend, my confidant, the person I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. But then, I remembered how she had so easily thrown all of that away. How she had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable, by choosing my brother. The shock of seeing her after all these years, standing there, still wearing the same look of concern on her face, ignited the anger and pain I had fought so hard to bury. How could she be here now, after everything? How could she act like nothing had ever happened? The urge to just turn around and walk out of that hospital room was almost unbearable. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I focused on my father, asking him about William's condition. My mind was racing, my heart pounding, as I heard the words I never expected to hear. William, my own brother, had been in a car accident. He had suffered a spinal cord injury, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors weren't sure if he would ever walk again. That wasn't even the worst of it. No, as my father continued to speak, he casually dropped another bombshell, something that cut deeper than any injury. They had done a paternity test. A test that confirmed William was indeed the father of Rebecca's child. I hadn't known about this. It was like a final nail in the coffin of everything they had done to me. Betrayed. Again. As if the weight of all this wasn't enough, a young boy, no older than 5 or 6, walked into the room. My nephew. I stared at him for a long moment, trying to process the fact that this little boy, who should have been a part of my life all along, was now standing in front of me. This was my brother's child, my flesh and blood, and yet I didn't know him. How could I? I didn't even know he existed until recently. It was surreal. Rebecca introduced him to me as his uncle. I spent a few minutes with him, asking about his favorite toys, trying to make small talk. But it felt strange. I barely knew this child. After the hospital visit, my mother insisted I come to their house. She wanted to talk more. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but I agreed. I just wanted to get this whole thing over with. When I arrived, my mother wasted no time. She launched into a long speech about family responsibility and how I needed to step up. She explained how overwhelmed Rebecca was, raising a child and caring for William as he recovered. I felt my blood start to boil as I listened. Finally, when she paused to take a breath, I couldn't hold back anymore. I told her exactly how I felt. "You're being selfish," I said. "You're thinking only about William, like you always have." It felt like a punch in the gut when I realized she hadn't once asked about me, about how I was doing, about my life over the past 6 years. It was as if I had never existed to her. "The only reason you're reaching out to me," I went on, "is because you need something from me. Not because you care about rebuilding our relationship." The words hit hard. They had to. And my mother didn't take it well. She tried to defend herself, saying that of course, she cared about me, but William's situation was urgent. "As the healthy brother, I had a responsibility," she said. I took a deep breath, fighting to stay calm, and said it again, "I can't help you. I can't throw away the life I've built, all the healing I've done, just to step in as if nothing ever happened." I told her I might be open to having a relationship with them again in the future, on my terms, only if they acknowledged how much they'd hurt me. I was clear, I would never act as a replacement for William or as a father figure for his child. They were on their own. My parents were furious. They called me selfish. They said I was abandoning them when they needed me most. But I didn't flinch. "You made your choice 6 years ago," I said. "Now you have to live with the consequences." I was done. Before I left, I told them I was open to staying in touch, if they could respect my boundaries, if they could show genuine interest in my life, and not just in what I could do for them. As I drove home that night, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. A small part of me felt guilty. How could I not help William's child? The thought of that little boy growing up without a father, without someone to guide him, twisted something inside me. But the bigger part of me, the part that had spent years healing from the betrayal, felt relief. I had stood up for myself. I had set boundaries. I wasn't going to let them take advantage of me anymore. I knew that blood ties don't give anyone the right to treat you poorly. And while family is important, it doesn't mean you have to accept mistreatment. I had spent years healing, and I wasn't about to reopen those wounds just because they suddenly needed me. In the weeks that followed, my parents called me a few times. The conversations were awkward, tense, but at least they were asking about me now. Not just about William. It was a small step, but maybe it meant something. Maybe there was hope for our relationship after all. For now, I'm focusing on myself. I've started seeing a therapist again, processing the emotions that resurfaced after reconnecting with my family. I'm pouring myself into my work and spending time with friends who've supported me through it all. The future of my relationship with my family is uncertain, but I know I made the right decision for me. I'm open to rebuilding, but only on my terms, at my pace. And no matter what happens, I'm going to move forward with my life, because I deserve peace, too. Thank you all for your support. This has been one of the most challenging situations I've ever faced, but your advice has given me a sense of clarity. I feel like I'm finally ready to move on.